Hey guys, tonight we step into a smoky longhouse deep in Viking country. Your boots squeak on sticky hay-covered planks. There's the distant clink of mead mugs, the rumble of laughter, and, yep, a man being yelled at for stealing a sheep again. Welcome to Viking justice. It's not exactly a courtroom with powdered wigs and gavels. No, here, the gavel is often a sword hilt slamming down on a table, and your jury is made up of elders who may or may not remember what you did last summer. The air is thick with peat smoke and judgment. You've been summoned to the thing, the Viking legal assembly, and tonight's case, well, it might involve theft, an insult about someone's beard, or possibly turning someone into a toad. Historians still argue whether Vikings actually believed in transformation magic or just used it as an excuse to exile that one annoying neighbor who never brought his own ale. The rules here are flexible. Depending on your social class, the exact way you get punished might differ. Richer folks paid with silver or livestock, poorer ones paid with missing ears or, occasionally, a dramatic chase scene into the woods. You, dear listener, are somewhere in between. Let's hope for a fine, and not a face tattoo. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the time down in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside a smoky hearth as the chieftain clears his throat. It's time to learn how Vikings punish their rule breakers, with a surprising mix of cleverness, cruelty, and the occasional goat-related twist. Justice begins at the Thing, a massive public gathering that's part court, part political convention, and part neighborhood barbecue. Everyone shows up. Farmers, warriors, gossipers, and a man who insists he's innocent despite smelling very guilty. You sit through oaths sworn on Thor's hammer, witnesses who may or may not be lying through their teeth, and a long speech about honor from someone with suspiciously blood-stained boots. The court hears complaints big and small. You might be accused of theft, slander, or, brace yourself, nithing, which basically means you're a dishonorable coward, the lowest insult in Viking culture. Being called a nithing could ruin your life faster than a dragon attack. Historians still argue whether this label came with automatic exile or just a lifetime of very cold shoulders at community feasts. There are no lawyers. You defend yourself with your mouth, your fists, or your uncle's reputation. If someone accuses you of lying, they can challenge you to a holmgang, a duel on a tiny island. Spoiler: this tends to end poorly for the guy with the limp. The punishments vary. Sometimes it's a hefty fine. Other times you're publicly humiliated, beaten, or declared an outlaw, which, in Viking terms, means your life becomes a medieval survival game. No one can help you. Everyone can hurt you. It's like getting kicked out of the internet and society at the same time. Still, there's structure to it all. The Vikings loved balance. If someone broke your nose, you didn't break theirs. You got paid for the exact value of a nose. Yes, there was a price list. A missing finger, 10 silver coins. An eye, more. An insult about your mother's cooking, possibly priceless. And that's just the start. You notice a man beside you fidgeting nervously. He's holding a cloth bag. Inside is a severed sheep tail. It's his proof in a case about livestock theft. The elders nod gravely, as if this is the most reasonable thing in the world. It's oddly comforting. Justice is weird here, but it exists. You're handed a bowl of thick stew while waiting your turn. It's mostly onions and mystery meat. You chew slowly, grateful you're not on trial for now. In this world, justice is loud, messy, and oddly satisfying. Someone nearby mutters about an upcoming case involving cheese sorcery. You pretend not to eavesdrop. As the fire crackles, the elder shouts your name. Everyone goes quiet. You stand. Your legs feel like jelly. You don't know if your fate involves silver, exile, or public embarrassment. All you know is things are about to get very Viking. And no, you probably won't survive this with your dignity intact. The chieftain's voice booms across the Longhouse, and all eyes settle on you. You're told that to prove your innocence, you'll undergo a simple test. Nothing too fancy. Just a little thing called trial by hot iron. You know, the kind of justice that involves burning metal and maximum finger pain. The instructions are clear in the vaguest possible way. You're handed a glowing bar of iron, fresh from the fire, and told to carry it 3 paces while the crowd watches, chewing their stew like it's dinner theater. This isn't about strength. It's about divine judgment. According to Norse belief, if your wounds heal clean within 3 days, the gods have deemed you innocent. If they fester, sorry, friend. You're guilty, and also mildly crispy. Your palms tingle in anticipation. Well, fear. The iron is placed in your hands, and the heat feels like every bad decision you've ever made. You shuffle forward, step by step, while the gathered villagers murmur. 3 paces. That's it. But those 3 paces stretch like an eternity. By the time you drop the iron onto the fur-covered ground, your hands are already blistering like bubble wrap in a sauna. You're told to wait. The priest will examine your hands in a few days. For now, you get bandaged up with moss and optimism. Historians still argue whether these trials were actually meant to be fair or were just public rituals with predetermined outcomes. Some say it was a way to let fate, or maybe social bias, decide. Others suggest the whole process was more about appeasing the community than the gods. Whatever the truth, one thing's clear. Viking justice wasn't subtle. But hot iron wasn't the only trial on the menu. Sometimes, people were told to walk barefoot over 9 red-hot plowshares. That's right, 9. Because apparently, 1 wasn't dramatic enough. Or you might be asked to stick your hand in boiling water and fish out a rock. No pressure. You shuffle to the side and nurse your wounds with ale. A girl beside you, accused of witchcraft, just dunked her hand into boiling water without flinching. She stares at you blankly. You decide not to make eye contact again. Still, there's a strange sense of order. As painful and theatrical as these trials are, they serve a purpose. The community watches. The accused perform. And in some strange, blistered way, justice is served. Kind of. Oh, and there's always a guy who claims he passed the iron trial with no scars at all. He also claims he once arm-wrestled a troll. His name's Bjorn. You do not trust Bjorn. Even children are familiar with the rules. They chant little rhymes about the trials, dark nursery songs about justice and melted fingers. One kid sings, "Hold the iron, walk the line, tell the gods if you did the crime." You stare into the fire and wonder what kind of bedtime stories these people grew up with. One curious detail? These ordeals weren't exclusive to the Vikings. Similar rituals happened across Europe, but the Norse added flair. They believed the gods were watching every moment and judging harshly. If you cried out in pain, perhaps Thor thought you were weak. If you passed out, maybe Loki was laughing. You wake up 2 days later with your hands wrapped in reindeer leather. The priest removes the bandages. Everyone leans in. Your hands? Not infected. Swollen and horrifying, yes, but no pus. You've been spared. Innocent. Or at least not obviously guilty. You're free to go. The chieftain nods. The girl with the witchy stare is still watching you. You avoid her again. As you step out into the cold air, your hands pulsing with heat, you realize justice here is less about facts and more about drama. The gods may or may not be real, but the audience definitely is. And they've just witnessed your burning performance. It's not Broadway, it's Viking law. And you didn't get branded or exiled, so we'll call that a win. The snow crunches under your feet as you wander back into the village, fingers still stiff and bandaged like badly wrapped sausages. You're just starting to feel grateful for surviving your hot iron ordeal when a sharp whistle cuts through the air. A group has gathered again outside the Longhouse. Something's about to go down. You join the small crowd circling a wiry man with wide eyes and a nervous twitch. He's clutching a small pouch and muttering that it was only 1 ring of silver, and he was going to return it anyway. Sure, that's what they all say. This man, whose name no one remembers, but everyone now calls Scarfi the Snatcher, is about to receive one of the oldest and simplest Viking punishments, the loss of an ear. Yes, if you were caught stealing, not in some elaborate heist, but even something as simple as a piece of jewelry or a chicken, chances are you weren't executed. Vikings valued productive members of society, even if their idea of productivity occasionally involved borrowing someone else's goat. So instead, they often marked thieves permanently. In Scarfi's case, it's an ear, not both, just one. To send a message, of course. You break the law, you lose a little bit of yourself, and now everyone can see that message every time you turn your head. The crowd cheers in that awkward, "Ooh, this is going to be fun" kind of way. Scarfi trembles, and a burly blacksmith steps forward, gripping a curved blade that looks far too enthusiastic. Historians still argue whether these mutilation punishments were always enforced, or just threats meant to shame people into confession. Some records suggest community forgiveness was common if the thief was useful or their family had decent mead. Others say these punishments were brutally common, especially when the crime disrupted trade or insulted someone important's beard. Scarfi's crime? He stole from a trader's wife, which apparently is a double sin, both theft and terrible manners. The blade is raised, and with a single swift motion, one slightly dirty ear flops to the snow. A child picks it up like a souvenir. His mother snatches it away with a frown, but also a quiet ooh of fascination. Scarfi howls, not just from pain but embarrassment. The wound is bandaged with rough cloth, and he's handed a nickname on the spot. Scarfi, half-ear. It sticks forever. In Viking culture, your nickname often defined you more than your birth name. You don't get to choose it. Your actions do. Later that evening, you spot Scarfy drinking mead with some warriors. His mood has oddly lifted. Apparently, losing an ear and surviving makes you a bit of a folk hero. Kids start imitating his swagger. A local ballad begins forming in the corner of the room involving him, a duck, and a gold ring. None of it rhymes, but that's not the point. Here's the twist. Viking punishment wasn't always about cruelty. It was about memory. Scars told stories. Mutilation wasn't just vengeance. It was a visible reminder of a crime written right on your body. And, in a twisted way, it gave you a new role in society. You're no longer just a man. You're the man who stole silver and lived to tell the tale. You overhear someone say that in another village, a thief had his nose notched so deep he whistled every time he sneezed. Another rumor says a woman who pickpocketed travelers got her front teeth filed into sharp points, so she'd never be kissed again. Brutal? Yes. But practical, in a Viking sort of way. Not all punishments left you with missing parts. Some just left you with new reputations, the kind that never heal. A man named Olaf once got caught spying on bathing women. He wasn't maimed, but he was paraded through the village in nothing but goat hide boots. Let's just say the nickname Olaf Goat Pants didn't exactly help his dating life. Back at the fire, Scarfy lifts his mug in a mock toast. You raise yours in return. He's missing an ear, sure, but he's still here. And in Viking society, here's better than 6 feet under. One thing becomes clear. These punishments, as odd and theatrical as they are, serve a bigger purpose. They mark you not just as guilty, but as part of the community again. Scorned, maybe. Laughed at, definitely. But still very much alive. You tug your cloak tighter and glance over your shoulder. That girl from the boiling water trial is still watching you. Maybe you should stop stealing glances, too. By now, you've probably figured out that Viking punishments didn't mess around. And just when you think it can't get more intense than having your ear sliced off or your hands roasted like campfire sausages, you learn about banishment. Not just go to your room banishment. Not even leave the village banishment. No, this is the full Viking experience. Banishment by boat. You stand on the rocky shore, the wind howling like an offended ancestor. Before you is a half-rotted fishing boat, missing at least 2 planks tied loosely to a post. Inside it, a jug of mead, half a loaf of bread, and, because this is the Viking Age, a nervous-looking goat. This is your ride. You've been declared an outlaw, a status called Fjorbaugsskardur if you're lucky. That's temporary exile. Or Skogangur if you're really unpopular. Which means you're not just exiled. You're legally killable by anyone, at any time. Even if you sneak back to say goodbye to your dog. Sorry, Fluffy. Historians still debate whether these banishments were meant to be death sentences, or if they were more like survival challenges, with bonus moral lessons. Some outlaws came back years later, bearded and changed. Others didn't come back at all. Maybe they found new lands. Maybe the goat ate the bread. The chieftain waves dismissively. Out you go, he says, as if this is an errand and not your forced relocation to literally wherever the wind takes you. The villagers gather to watch. Some look sympathetic. One is eating berries and clearly just here for the drama. You climb into the boat, the wood creaking ominously. The goat bleats. You push off. There's no map, no compass, just hope and ocean spray. Vikings believed in fate, and if the gods favored you, maybe your boat would drift to a new land. Maybe you'd find Iceland, or a smaller, colder version of Iceland, or a rock shaped vaguely like Thor's chin. The punishment wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. To be cast out meant you were beyond the protection of the gods and the tribe. You became a ghost in the eyes of your community. People wouldn't say your name. Children wouldn't be named after you. And your mother would probably tell people you moved to Denmark just to save face. Yet there's a strange freedom to it. You're unbound, unclaimed, a blank slate with frostbite. Some exiles formed their own outlaw communities, gritty bands of misfits living in the woods, raiding border towns, or just getting really into poetry. Yes, poetry. Vikings loved it, even the banished ones. Especially the banished ones, since they had so much time to reflect on life, death, and why the goat never stops staring. You float for hours. The sky darkens and you start talking to the goat. His name is Harold now. He doesn't respond. You're not sure if he's your new companion or your replacement if things go south. Suddenly, a wave tips the boat and you panic, clinging to the sides like a sea-soaked pretzel. But you survive. You always do, somehow. That's part of the Viking code. Endure first, complain later. By dawn, land appears. A jagged coastline with dark forests and the smell of something burning. You've either found a settlement or just rode directly into a dragon's barbecue. Either way, you're alive. Technically. You drag the boat ashore, Harold jumping out ahead of you. You've been exiled, sure, but not erased. Some say the greatest Viking warriors were once outlaws. That hardship tempered them. That banishment was the fire in which future legends were forged. Historians still argue whether outlaw sagas are exaggerated, or if half the heroes we admire today started as screw-ups with a boat and a bad attitude. As you collapse into the wet sand, the goat staring down at you like some fuzzy spirit guide, you wonder what your saga will be. Maybe one day they'll carve your name into a runestone. Maybe you'll be remembered not as a criminal, but as a survivor. Or maybe you'll just open a goat farm. And honestly, that doesn't sound so bad. The days after banishment are slow and quiet. You spend most of your time sharpening sticks, talking to trees, and learning which mushrooms don't cause hallucinations of Thor wearing pajamas. You might think the worst is behind you, but not in Viking society. No, there's something even more dramatic than exile. It's called a blood feud, and it starts when someone decides your mistake wasn't just a crime. It was personal. Let's say, for example, that in your younger, rowdier years, you got into a scuffle. It was a silly fight, really. Someone insulted your beard. You threw an ale cup. They slipped on a fish. The next thing you know, you've accidentally killed someone's cousin. Let's call him Rolf. Now, in many societies, you might get arrested or fined, maybe sent to jail. But in Viking culture, you've just signed up for a multi-generational revenge saga. The family of Rolf doesn't just want justice, they want balance. Someone's life has been taken, so unless they accept a formal settlement called wergild, literally man price, they now have the right to kill you in return. And not just you, your brother, your uncle, anyone who shares your blood and attends family barbecues. You hear the first whispers of it one morning when a stranger spots you near a waterfall and mutters, "Isn't that the one who flattened Rolf?" Then they walk away, just a little too quickly. Uh-oh. Historians still argue whether blood feuds were ever meant to be resolved peacefully, or if they were just Viking Netflix, endless episodes of revenge, betrayal, and who's marrying whom to stop the killing. Some say the thing could negotiate peace. Others say it usually just added fuel to the fire by holding dramatic public debates that made everyone even angrier. You try to offer Vergild. You gather everything valuable you can, silver rings, your last goat, yes, Harold again, and even that rare imported comb from Saxonland. The family listens. Then they say it's not enough. Apparently, Rolf was a good man, and always shared his smoked fish. Now they want blood. This is when Viking justice turns theatrical. The family calls a gathering. You're invited, or rather, summoned. You sit in a field surrounded by villagers, sheep, and the heavy sense that this picnic could turn violent. They want to fight. One-on-one, no weapons, just fists, reputation, and lots of grunting. You step into the makeshift ring, grass squishing under your boots, and square up to a man built like a wooden barn. He's Rolf's brother. His name is Thorbjorn, which loosely translates to Thunder Bear. Not ideal. The fight is rough. You get a broken nose, he gets a bruised rib, and both of you get a weird kind of mutual respect. No one dies, which is rare and honestly a bit disappointing to the spectators. But after the dust settles, something strange happens. The elder of Rolf's family, a grandmother named Sigrid who's dressed in black and carries a staff topped with chicken bones, stands and nods. "Let the gods decide now," she says. That's Viking code for "we're done here, for now." Turns out, blood feuds could be paused. Sometimes permanently, especially if both sides realized they had better things to do, like not dying. But the tension never fully disappeared. You'd walk into a hall, and someone would raise an eyebrow. Or your ale would taste suspiciously like spit. It was a game of shadows and suspicion. One wild story you overhear by the fire involves a feud that lasted 100 years, sparked by a stolen cloak. The great-grandchildren of the original cloak thief were still stabbing each other in back alleys over a garment none of them had ever seen. Other feuds were solved creatively. One involved marriage. A man who killed his rival's brother was forced to marry his enemy's sister. They reportedly lived in awkward silence for decades, with occasional passive-aggressive loaves of bread. But here's the fringe Viking fact that really tickles the brain. In some remote regions, people believed that if a feud went unsettled, the dead could return to haunt the guilty. Yes, vengeful ghosts called Draugr were said to rise from their barrows, dragging seaweed and revenge until they got closure. Or at least a good brawl. You lie awake that night, staring at the stars, wondering if Rolf liked seaweed. Your nose still throbs, and you're starting to understand that in Viking society, forgiveness isn't so much a virtue as it is a survival strategy. A blood feud doesn't always end in death. Sometimes it ends with both sides too tired to care. And honestly, after 3 nights in a damp cave with nothing but pickled herring and goat snores, you're too tired to care too. The forest around you is quiet, thick with pine and the smell of damp moss. You've survived exile, a slap-happy blood feud, and a nose that still whistles when you breathe too hard. But your punishment isn't over yet, not even close. You've just been sentenced to one of the Viking world's lesser-known, but strangely poetic, forms of discipline, the time-out tree. That's right. Instead of sending you to prison, the local thing decided to tie you to a tree for 2 days. Naked? No, that would be weird, but humiliated? Absolutely. They walk you out at dawn into the fog, past the village goats who give you the judgmental side-eye. The tree itself is massive, an ancient pine that's seen more crime than the village elder's gossip circle. Its bark is split and weathered, and you half expect it to whisper, "Another one." You're strapped to it with thick ropes, arms loose enough to wiggle, legs just far enough apart to keep you from napping. No movement, no shelter. And if it rains, which it always does, you're getting wet. Punishments like this weren't about pain. They were about shame. You become a living scarecrow, on display, literally rooted in place, while the world moves on without you. And the birds? Oh, the birds love this. They sit just out of reach and judge you from above, squawking like winged grandmothers with opinions. Historians still debate whether this kind of punishment was universal across Norse territories, or just a regional quirk, possibly borrowed from older pagan rites. Some suggest it began as a ritual of reflection, meant to cleanse the soul through exposure to nature and silence. Others think it was just a low-budget holding cell. Either way, it works. You think a lot out there, about your choices, about goats, about whether pine sap counts as a protein. Villagers occasionally walk by, pretending not to look, but they always do. A few bring food, flatbread, dried fish, and once a suspiciously lumpy apple. One child throws a rock at your foot, misses, then apologizes so politely it almost brings a tear to your eye. At night, the real trial begins. It's cold, and the tree creaks in the wind like it's laughing at you. You try to sleep upright, but every branch seems to jab you in a new philosophical direction. The goat, yes, Harold is back, nuzzles your boot in the moonlight. You're not sure if he's checking on you or just hoping for leftovers. Either way, you whisper your regrets to him, and he just chews grass like a therapist who's heard it all before. You remember tales you've heard around the fire, of others who stood where you are. One man confessed to stealing honey, then spent 3 days tree-bound in a thunderstorm, swearing never to touch another hive. He became a beekeeper, oddly enough. Another tale speaks of a woman accused of slander, whispering that her neighbor brewed weak mead. She was tied to the tree for a day and emerged with a best-selling saga of poems about regret, weather, and overly sensitive mead enthusiasts. By morning of the second day, your muscles ache, your feet are numb, and your inner monologue has developed a slight dramatic flair. You've composed 3 songs in your head, written an apology speech to Rolf's family, and sworn off fermented cabbage forever. But something's shifted. You feel calmer, humiliated, yes, but also oddly free. There's something about being motionless in nature, bound to a symbol of age and strength, that makes your petty crimes feel small. The world hasn't ended. You still exist. The tree didn't judge you. It just stood there, like it always does. When the ropes are finally loosened and your arms flop down like overcooked fish, no one claps. There's no triumphant music. Just a gentle nod from the chieftain and a muttered, "Hope you learned something." And you did. You learned that silence can be deafening, that pine needles are aggressively pointy, and that sometimes the most powerful punishment doesn't scream, it just watches. You walk away slowly, stretching limbs that forgot how to be limbs. The villagers part like a respectful tide, some pretending you were never tied up at all. Others smile faintly, like veterans of the same leafy purgatory. Later that evening, a new case is brought to the thing. A man who let his sheep wander into sacred burial mounds. His punishment? You guessed it. You glance at the old pine in the distance, now empty, but never forgotten. It sways a little in the wind, like it's nodding to you. Yeah, you two are old friends now. You're back in the village now, smelling slightly of bark, shame, and moral growth. You think maybe you've escaped the worst of Viking justice, but then you spot it. At the edge of the village square, just past the chicken pen and the man arguing with his dog, there it stands, a shame pillar. Imagine a tall stone monolith, carved with runes, some faded, others still sharp, bearing the names of people who broke the rules. It's the Viking version of a public comment section, except you can't delete your entry, and everyone walking by gets to read it forever. You approach it cautiously. The stone is cold to the touch, and you can already see familiar names etched deep into its surface. There's Eric the Wobbly, banished for drunkenly trying to ride a pig into a funeral. There's Solveig Fishtongue, punished for gossiping so much it caused 2 marriages to collapse and a boat to sink. And now, as you tilt your head, yep, there's yours. Slightly crooked, but unmistakable. They've given you a nickname, too. Tree Hugger the Foolish. Ouch. This is your punishment now. No blood, no exile. Just permanent public reputation damage. And in Viking society, your reputation wasn't just social currency. It was your legacy. People remembered names. Names became sagas. And sagas became either heroic epics or long-running jokes. Historians still debate how common shame pillars really were. Some say they were rare, reserved for the most awkward offenses, like bad poetry recitals or sheep-related misunderstandings. Others believe they were widespread, used in smaller communities to control behavior without resorting to physical punishment. What's agreed on is this: Vikings loved accountability, and nothing holds you accountable like 200 pounds of granite calling you out in runes. The worst part? You can't hide it. Anyone traveling through the village stops to read. Traders, poets, warriors, they all glance at the stone while adjusting their cloaks and pretending not to laugh. One guy even sketches it into a journal like he's collecting embarrassing Pokemon. But here's the twist. Being on the pillar doesn't always destroy you. Some names up there belong to people who later became respected elders, ship captains, even poets whose works still echo through the fjords. You remember one name in particular, Hrolf No Toes. Everyone knows he lost his toes to frostbite after falling asleep on a roof, drunk. His name was carved in shame, but today he's a legend. Children dress as him during winter festivals. A saga was written about his unfortunate nap, and it's actually kind of beautiful. You start to realize something. The shame pillar isn't just a warning. It's a marker in your story, a chapter you can grow from. Sure, for now, people giggle when they see your name. But give it time, and maybe, just maybe, your tale becomes a punchline and a proverb. Don't end up like Tree Hugger, they might say. Unless you learn your lesson like he did. You sit nearby and watch people pass the pillar. One man frowns and mutters, "He was framed." You nod politely, grateful. Another lady chuckles and points. You pretend to scratch your face, hiding a blush. But then someone else stops, traces your name with a finger, and whispers, "He got back up." You don't know who they are. Doesn't matter. It still counts. And while you're sitting there, you overhear a particularly juicy rumor. A man down the coast was added to his village's shame pillar for farting during a sacred ritual. Repeatedly. Loudly. It said the gods themselves requested the carving. His name, Thorald the Windbreaker. Now, that is branding. Some fringe scholars believe these pillars even served as early legal records, a sort of historical database carved in stone. Others argue they were simply psychological deterrents. Break the rules, and we'll make you famous in the worst way. You begin to feel oddly at peace. Your name is up there, sure, but it means you belong. You were judged, punished, and folded back into the community, flaws and all. You get up and dust yourself off. A couple of kids are carving crude faces into a wooden beam nearby. One of them asks, "Are you the tree guy?" You nod. He grins. Cool. And just like that, your shame becomes a story. Not a proud one, maybe, but one that fits into the noisy, messy, weirdly loving puzzle that is Viking life. You pat the stone once before you leave. It's cold, but familiar now, like an old friend who holds on to your worst moment, but doesn't let it define you. You wake the next morning with a stiff neck and the lingering memory of your name carved in stone. But at least you slept indoors, which is more than you can say for last week. You're starting to feel like maybe you've weathered the worst of Viking punishments. And then you spot it. In the center of the village square, just beyond the blacksmith's forge, there's a contraption that can only be described as wooden humiliation in carpentry form. Welcome to the Viking stocks, or, as you're starting to call them, the world's worst wedgies. A couple of thick beams, curved holes for your neck and wrists, a locking bar. It's primitive, uncomfortable, and designed for one thing: maximum awkwardness. The Norse version may not look quite like the English pillories you've seen in history books, but the concept is the same. You're restrained, stuck in a pose that's somehow undignified and theatrical at the same time. You try not to make eye contact as the village elder announces your next punishment. For repeated disrespect to the thing and excessive talking during judgment time, Treehugger shall spend the day in the stocks. You? Disrespectful? Okay, maybe a little, but only because someone called your cloak a bit saggy, and you had feelings. So, there you are, wrists and neck locked in. The wood is rough and cold. Your back cramps immediately. Your nose itches within 30 seconds, and of course, you can't scratch it. The true agony begins when the village's children arrive. Let's talk about Viking kids for a moment. Cute, sure, but also absolutely savage when you're defenseless. One throws a piece of hard bread that hits you square on the forehead. Another pokes your foot with a stick. A third just sits there and stares at you like you're a particularly fascinating type of fish. Historians still argue whether stocks were used as formal punishment across all Norse settlements, or just in places with extra wood and extra judgment. Some think it was a borrowed custom from continental Europe. Others believe it had deep roots in Scandinavian shame culture, serving as both entertainment and warning. Either way, the whole village takes turns strolling by. Some offer unsolicited advice. You should have bowed more during the thing. Others offer food you absolutely cannot reach. A juicy apple dangled just out of biting range. You nearly cry when it rolls into the dirt. One fringe story you remember involved a man named Ketil Fork-Tongue, who was locked in the stocks for claiming he could out-sing the skalds. His punishment included being pelted with fish while forced to recite poetry backward. He emerged slimy but wiser, reportedly switching careers to goat grooming. You endure your sentence with as much dignity as one can while drooling onto a wooden beam. The sun climbs higher. You sweat. Your legs fall asleep. A bird lands briefly on your head and then leaves something behind as a gift. You're too tired to care. But here's the odd thing. By late afternoon, the mood changes. People stop mocking you. Some even start chatting, telling stories, sharing news. The blacksmith leans over and says, "Happened to me last spring. I fell asleep during a wedding speech." You nod, as best you can. Suddenly, your shame becomes a bridge. A woman hands you a cup of water and lets you sip it awkwardly from a ladle. "You're doing better than my brother," she says. "He panicked and sneezed on the law speaker." You try not to laugh, but end up snorting, which honestly just adds to the moment. That evening, the stocks creak open and you're released, shoulders aching and dignity only mildly bruised. The children cheer. The sun sets in a sky smeared with fire-orange clouds. You feel lighter, like you've earned your place among the punished and redeemed. And that's the thing with Viking justice. It's rarely about ruining someone. It's about testing them, humbling them, then welcoming them back. covered in stale bread and small bird droppings, sure, but back nonetheless. Before bed, someone tells you about an old custom, that if you survive the stalks without crying, you earn a kind of informal respect. You didn't cry, they say, so that's something. You lie down that night under a wool blanket that smells faintly of sheep and smoke. Your neck still hurts, but your heart feels oddly proud. You were tested, mocked, and pelted with what might have been a turnip. And you survived. Now, that is very Viking. You've gotten used to Viking justice by now. The ear thing. Handled. The tree. Been there. Stalks. Survived with flair. But you've been hearing whispers all morning, something about a man who crossed a line so sacred, so untouchable, it made everyone gasp in synchronized horror. He stole a horse. Now, you might be thinking, really, that's it? But in the Viking world, a horse wasn't a just transportation. It was wealth, status, a noble companion in war, farming, and surprisingly deep friendship. Stealing one was like running off with someone's car, dog, and identity all at once. It wasn't just rude, it was spiritual betrayal. You're summoned to the village green, not because you're guilty this time, for once, but because someone else is. A wiry man named Bjarki stands in the center, surrounded by the murmuring crowd. The stolen horse has already been returned, neighing smugly, perhaps aware that it's more beloved than its former thief. Bjarki looks calm, too calm, which is probably why the elders have decided on something unconventional. Instead of execution or exile, they declare that Bjarki is now unmensch. The term has a few meanings depending on region, but here it essentially means he's no longer a person. It's chilling. From this moment forward, no one can speak to him. No one can feed him. No one can trade with him or acknowledge his existence. He becomes socially invisible, like a ghost that breathes but doesn't matter. And worse, it's forever. Historians still argue about the origins of this form of punishment. Some believe it was a rare but culturally devastating sentence, usually reserved for traitors or serious spiritual crimes, like horse theft, grave robbing, or breaking sacred oaths. Others think it was a mix of exile and social purging, meant to destroy someone from the inside out. The fringe belief? That the unmensch were cursed, not just by people, but by the land itself. That forests would turn cold around them. That animals would avoid them. That even the gods would look away. Bjarki is given nothing, not even a glance. He tries to speak, to plead, but no one responds. He shouts a curse. The villagers don't flinch. You're told not to look at him, to treat him as air. It's one of the cruelest things you've ever witnessed, and yet it's eerily effective. A week later, you see Bjarki walking along the ridge, shaggy and silent. children giggle as they pass him, pretending he's a ghost. A dog barks and runs away. No one offers food. No one lets him near the fire. He lives in the woods now, not quite outlawed, but certainly unclaimed. You wonder, is this worse than death? Then you hear the old tales, the ones whispered at night when mead loosens lips. They say some unmensch eventually turned feral, that without community, their minds broke. One lived among wolves and forgot human language. Another returned years later, claiming he could hear the trees speak. Another simply disappeared, leaving behind a trail of bones shaped like runes. Others, however, tried to redeem themselves. One man, cursed for stealing sacred mead, wandered the land planting trees at every village border, carving apologies into each one. It's said that, after decades, his name was re-spoken. He was invited home for one final feast. He died at the table, smiling. You can't help but feel a little chill when Bjarki walks past again. He's thinner, quiet, but not angry. He simply exists on the edge of your world, unseen, unheld, and you realize something. Viking punishment wasn't always violent. Sometimes it was quiet. Social death, inflicted not with swords, but with silence. In some ways, it's more haunting than any blood feud or burning ordeal, because we're all built to belong. And when that's taken from you, when you're made into a ghost that no one mourns, you don't just lose your rights, you lose yourself. Later that night, as you sit by the fire with the others, sharing a bowl of stew, you catch your reflection in the mead. For the first time in days, you're grateful. Grateful that people still see you. Grateful that you're still someone. You've seen punishment by silence, by fire, by trees, and by public ridicule. And just when you think the Vikings have exhausted their list of creative consequences, along comes one that feels like it was invented by a deeply frustrated barber. Nose cutting, that's right. In certain crimes, particularly those involving deception, betrayal, or breaking honor codes in a truly personal way, the punishment wasn't death or exile. It was facial redesign. You first hear about it from an old man at the forge. He's polishing a blade and tells the tale with a smirk. You lie to your chieftain, you lose a bit of trust, and maybe the tip of your nose. You laugh nervously. He doesn't. Across the village, a man known only as Snub Hauk walks by. You can guess why. His nose ends in an abrupt, flat shelf, like someone forgot to finish sculpting him. He's not hiding it either. It's there, right in the open, framed by a thick, braided beard and a proud scowl, as if to say, yes, I messed up. No, you may not speak of it. Historians still argue about how widespread this practice was. Some claim nose-cutting was rare, used mostly in legal dramas or revenge tales, while others say it was surprisingly common in cases of adultery, oath-breaking, or insulting someone's hamingja, a concept similar to honor or spiritual fortune. In Viking law, shame wasn't just a social byproduct. it was engineered. And altering someone's face, that was a walking punishment, an eternal banner that shouted, "I messed up," even if your mouth stayed shut. Snubhouck's crime? He apparently swore a false oath during a land dispute, claiming part of a fjord that wasn't his. The community didn't just fine him, they made him into a lesson. Now, every time someone negotiates over pasture land or argues about who owns which cow, they glance at Snubhouck and remember, don't lie to the thing. But this punishment wasn't just about noses. In some cases, entire faces were reshaped, ears sliced, lips branded, and yes, in especially grim tales, tongues split. Not enough to kill, just enough to mark. To remake someone's outside to match how society now viewed their inside. You recall one whispered story about a woman named Brynhild, who was caught poisoning mead to rig a marriage dispute. Her punishment. Her cheeks were carved with tiny, permanent lines in the shape of a spider. They said it marked her as deceitful, but others say she wore it like war paint and became a feared herbalist. The debate still simmers. Were these punishments enforced as law, or as community-driven acts of revenge? Some scholars argue they were more symbolic than systematic, meant to shock, not standardize. Others believe there were set protocols, and facial mutilation served as a non-lethal way to neutralize social threats. It's hard to know, but one thing's clear. In a world where appearance and reputation were tightly woven, altering someone's face was a powerful statement. You catch yourself checking your own reflection in a still pool later that day, tracing your nose with one finger. It's still there, intact. You feel grateful and slightly more determined to keep your promises. You also begin to notice how people treat Snubhouck. At first, it's pity, then respect. Not everyone shuns him. In fact, he's grown into a local authority on honesty. Need a second opinion during a property dispute? Ask the man who paid dearly for lying. Need advice on truth-telling? He's your guy. Irony and wisdom bundled into one rugged silhouette. And here's the curious thing. Some people lean into it. You overhear two teenagers arguing about whether getting your nose cut makes you look more mysterious. One even says, "I'd take a half nose over 2 years of goat duty." They laugh, but not entirely in jest. There's a kind of strange charisma to visible punishment. You're marked, yes, but you're also memorable. In a society where sagas are everything, a scar can be your opening line. Back in your hut that night, as the wind howls outside and the fire crackles low, you think about what it would mean to carry your crime on your face. No hiding, no pretending, just walking through the world with your mistakes etched into your skin. There's a brutal honesty in that. A raw, unfiltered accountability. The kind only Vikings could invent. With a knife. You've heard tales of hot iron, public stocks, exile, and even face-altering justice. But nothing prepares you for the moment. A man is dragged into the square, writhing, soaking wet, and yelling something about fish gods. Welcome to the Viking trial by water, a chilly, illogical, and altogether terrifying ritual where guilt or innocence is determined by how well you float or sink. It starts with a crime that's hard to prove. Sorcery, dishonesty, or being a general nuisance to the community. The elders can't agree, the witnesses contradict each other, and no one wants to say the wrong thing in front of the chieftain's wife again. So instead, they call for the cold truth, literally. The accused is stripped to their underlayer, bound loosely, and led to the nearest body of water. In this case, a pond fed by glacial meltwater that smells like frogs and regret. Villagers gather around, holding their cloaks tight against the wind, and you join them with cautious curiosity. The logic of the ordeal is unique. If you sink, it's because the water accepts your innocence. If you float, it's a sign that your body rejects the purity of the earth and you're therefore guilty. Yes, sinking is good. Drowning, even better. Historians still argue over where this practice originated and how widespread it was among the Norse. Some believe it came from older Germanic traditions, while others suggest it was an adaptation of Christian influences as Viking territories began to mingle with continental law. Either way, the cold didn't care who invented it. The man in question, Egil Goatfoot, is accused of sorcery after a few too many cows fainted in his presence. Coincidence? Maybe. Witchcraft? Who knows? The villagers don't want to risk it. Egil is nervous. You would be too. He stares at the water like it's about to offer legal advice. Someone tightens the rope around his wrists, not cruelly, just firmly enough to ensure maximum awkwardness. Then, with a dramatic heave, he's tossed in. The splash is impressive. For a moment, everyone leans in, squinting. Egil bobs. His chest pops up, his knees. Then, a little wave carries him back toward the shore like a soggy accusation. People gasp. One woman crosses herself. Another throws a radish. "He floats," someone yells. "Guilty," another roars. You suppress a sigh. Poor Egil, accused of magic, betrayed by buoyancy. But here's the kicker. Egil may be guilty in the eyes of the village, but he's not executed. Instead, he's sentenced to ritual penance, which in this case involves living alone in a cave for 40 days with nothing but dried fish and a copy of the Havamal, the Norse Book of Wisdom. He'll emerge either a reformed man or a better poet. Possibly both. Some fringe tales tell of people surviving water trials only to be declared innocent anyway, especially if the rope snapped or a raven flew overhead. Superstition always played a role. It wasn't just about sinking. It was about signs. A woman once floated for an entire hour and was still declared pure because a double rainbow appeared mid-ordeal. True story, allegedly. Still, the psychological effect is undeniable. Water was sacred. Lakes and rivers were places of spirits, gods, and mystery. To be tested by water meant surrendering to forces no one could control, not even the chieftain. Later that evening, around the hearth, people discuss the trial with the same tone they use for weather and goat births. Egil didn't scream too much. He always was floaty. Reckon he'll come back with a beard of moss. It's almost casual, but not to you. You keep thinking about the silence before the splash, the way the villagers held their breath, hoping the water would decide for them. How easily a ripple can carry someone from person to pariah. It's not just punishment. It's mythology wrapped in ritual, a moment where law meets folklore, and where justice sometimes forgets to pack a towel. You step outside feeling the chill air against your face. The moonlight dances across the pond, still rippling with Egil's memory. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleats. You shiver, not from cold, but from knowing that in Viking society, even the water gets a vote. And you're still on dry land, so for now, you call that a win. You'd think by now you've seen every punishment a Viking could cook up, but there's one more sentence that chills you even more than the glacial pond. It's the dreaded status no Viking ever wants to hear announced. Skogarmadur. Literally translated, it means man of the forest, but it's so much worse than it sounds. It doesn't mean you're a peaceful tree hugger weaving moss into your beard. No. It means you've been declared an outlaw, and not in the romantic wanted poster kind of way. In Viking terms, you are now outside the law. Anyone can kill you. No one can help you. You are unpersoned, undeserving of mercy, protection, or even a decent burial. You don't just lose your home, you lose your place in the world. And today, someone is being made into one. The man's name is Hrafn, a fisherman who allegedly sabotaged another man's boat over a love triangle involving pickled herring and poetry. It's all very confusing, but what matters now is that the thing has spoken. Hrafn is no longer Hrafn. He's a Skogarmadur. The judgment is announced in front of the whole village. The chieftain raises a hand and says, "Let it be known, no one shall aid him. No one shall shelter him. If he is seen near the village, he may be slain without guilt." You watch as Hrafn, stunned and pale, is given a small pack of supplies and ushered toward the tree line. He tries to speak. No one responds. He pleads with his sister. She looks away. His dog whimpers, but even it doesn't follow. He disappears into the woods, swallowed by the shadows of pines. The crowd disperses like it was nothing. Someone immediately brings up lunch. Life goes on, for everyone except Hrafn. Historians still argue over the details of Viking outlawry. Some suggest it was typically temporary, a period of a few years spent in exile before being allowed to return if the offense was minor. Others claim once someone was named Skogarmadur, they were as good as dead. There are legends, of course, stories of outlaws who survived, who carved new lives in the wild, building hidden homesteads far from the fjords. They became ghost stories, bandits, hermits. Some even returned in disguise to exact revenge or plead for mercy. But for every tale of redemption, there were 10 of betrayal, starvation, or a quiet death in the frost. The most chilling part: killing an outlaw wasn't considered murder. It was a public service. There was no blood debt to pay, no vengeance owed. It was justice, neatly outsourced to nature and strangers with sharp weapons. You remember an old saga about a skogarmadur who left behind a trail of rune stones marked only with riddles. They say he went mad talking to the trees. Some villagers believe those stones still exist, hidden deep in forgotten valleys, echoing his last thoughts. What's more, outlawry didn't just impact the individual. It stained their entire family. Sons and daughters would carry the shame. Friends might be shunned for even remembering them. Their name would be struck from oral tradition, wiped from the sagas. It was death of the body and the story. You walk past the village borders that evening and look out into the trees. Somewhere out there, Hrafn is trying to make fire with wet wood and hope. The forest feels endless. It swallows sound. It swallows men. One elder once told you, "The worst death is not being remembered. Even a fool with a carved stone gets more than the skogarmadur. It haunts you." You sit by the fire that night, a little quieter than usual. The crackling logs seem louder. The stars seem colder. You wrap your cloak tighter and feel a tiny gratitude in your gut. You're still inside the circle. You still have a name people say out loud. And sometimes, that's all that separates you from the forest. After watching Hrafn disappear into the forest like a broken shadow, you expect the village mood to be somber, reflective, maybe even a little shaken. But instead, people are oddly cheerful. They're preparing for a gathering at the Longhouse, stringing up lanterns, laying out cured meat, and arguing over who gets to sit closest to the hearth. Turns out, tonight isn't just for feasting. It's time for a different kind of justice, the kind that happens when love turns sour and someone forgets to feed the goats. Welcome to Viking Divorce Court. Now, let's set the mood. The fire is blazing, mead is flowing, and a woman named Astrid is standing dead center, hands on hips, declaring loudly that her husband smells like fermented fish, doesn't contribute to the household economy, and, most importantly, never delivered on the full dowry goat. Scandalous. In Viking culture, marriage was seen as a contract, social, spiritual, and yes, financial. If that contract broke down, there were options. Divorce wasn't taboo. In fact, it was refreshingly normal. But that doesn't mean it was easy. You sit cross-legged by the hearth as the village elder calls the couple forward. Astrid's husband, a broad-shouldered man named Bjorn, looks deeply uncomfortable. His beard has breadcrumbs in it. Not a great start. Astrid lays out her complaints like she's reciting a shopping list. Laziness, public embarrassment, one incident involving falling into a fish barrel, and general failure to be a man of worth. The room nods, quietly. Bjorn, for his part, mumbles something about being misunderstood, and that the goat was sick anyway. His defense is not winning hearts. Here's where it gets interesting. In Viking law, either spouse could initiate a divorce. A woman simply had to declare it in front of witnesses, often at the couple's bed or at the main door of their home, repeating her decision 3 times for emphasis. Astrid, of course, decided to do it in front of the entire village, with dramatic flair. Historians still debate how frequent divorces were, and whether they came with penalties or just social consequences. Some say women had quite a bit of freedom in this regard, especially if their families were strong or well-connected. Others argue that while divorce was legal, it was still heavily swayed by community reputation and economic influence. In this case, Astrid has both. And when she announces her final decision, "I release this man from my bed and from my keys," a cheer goes up. Someone starts clapping. Someone else brings out cheese. Bjorn tries to protest, but the elder cuts him off. The mead goat was part of the contract. You had 3 winters to deliver. The fault is yours. He slumps in defeat. No one claps for him. Now, you might expect the divorced parties to separate quietly, but this is Viking land. There's protocol, and it comes with a healthy dose of public awkwardness. First, Astrid is entitled to reclaim all the property she brought into the marriage, down to the last woolen tunic. A couple of villagers help her carry it out, while Bjorn sits grumbling on a stool. Second, there's the symbolic door slam. She slams the door of the Longhouse shut behind her as she exits. It echoes dramatically. Some say this represents the sealing of fate. Others say it just feels really satisfying. But the drama doesn't stop there. Later that night, as the mead flows and tongues loosen, you hear of past divorce punishments that went far beyond mere door slamming. One man had to serve a winter in marriage penance, chopping wood for the entire village while wearing a tunic that read, "I forgot the goat." Another was forced to compose an apology saga and sing it during feasts, badly. There's even an old tale about a woman who divorced her husband for hoarding onions. He tried to beg forgiveness by carving her likeness into a tree. It was not flattering. She left anyway, with the onions. Some fringe beliefs held that failed marriages were signs of disharmony with the gods, especially if they produced no children. A few remote villages reportedly demanded couples perform fertility rituals or face symbolic shunning. Others just gave up and threw 2 loaves of bread into the river to represent a clean break. Honestly, that's kind of poetic. You think about all the rules, rituals, and ridiculousness of Viking love and loss. It wasn't all passion and poetry. It was contracts, expectations, and, when things fell apart, very public reckonings. Still, there's something honest about it. People didn't stay in misery for tradition's sake. They owned their failures, announced them loudly, and moved on. With goats or without. You catch Astrid later, sipping mead and laughing with her friends. She doesn't seem sad. She seems free. Bjorn, meanwhile, is petting a goat in the corner. Maybe he's learning. Maybe he's composing a song. Either way, justice was done. And love? Well, it'll have to try again tomorrow. You wake up to the sound of distant laughter and someone shouting, "He insulted the beard!" That's enough to get you up and dressed. Curiosity prickling like a cold wind down your spine. Because today, you're about to witness Viking justice at its weirdest. There's no ear-chopping, no outlaw declarations, no boiling lakes. Just a man named Sten standing in the middle of the village square, red-faced and fuming while everyone else laughs around him. His crime? He called someone's beard uneven. And apparently, that's a very big deal. See, in Viking society, insults weren't just rude, they were legally actionable. There were actual laws about what you could or couldn't say about someone's appearance, ancestry, or manhood. If your words were considered need, a form of shameful, slanderous insult, you could end up fined, punished, or challenged to a duel. Yes, even if it was just about facial hair. Today, Sten is facing accusations of nidverse, a kind of poetic insult that questions someone's honor in rhyme. He composed a short but deadly ditty about another man's lopsided beard and slightly crooked smile, and sang it during dinner. Everyone laughed, except the guy with the beard, who is now demanding compensation or combat. You sit nearby, eating an apple and thoroughly enjoying the drama. Historians still argue over how seriously these laws were enforced. Some claim that need was among the worst social offenses in Viking law, especially if it called someone unmanly or accused them of sorcery, cowardice, or being a poor warrior. Others think these laws were more performative, designed to keep the peace with a bit of theatrics. But one thing is clear. Vikings took reputation seriously. Words could bruise just as deeply as weapons. Which brings us to this moment. The accused is asked to apologize. Sten refuses. "It was uneven," he insists. "I was doing him a favor." Gasps all around. The offended party, a man named Torfi Beard Blessed, steps forward. He's enormous, with braids that look like they were woven by the gods themselves. He demands trial by cheese. Yes, you heard that right. Apparently, in this village, there's a local tradition where small disputes, those too ridiculous for full-scale punishment, are settled with a challenge known as sorcery by cheese. It's part joke, part superstition, and entirely unregulated. The accused must stare down a wheel of fermented goat cheese while the community chants mildly magical nonsense. If he laughs, he's guilty. If he sneezes, double guilt. If he holds a straight face for 1 full minute, he's considered blessed by the spirits of dairy and forgiven. You couldn't make this up if you tried. A goat cheese wheel is produced. A chair is placed. Sten sits, face tense. The chanting begins. It's part lullaby, part insult. Something about curds of courage and cheesy hearts that crumble. It's all very silly, very serious and very Viking. Sten sneezes. The crowd erupts. Torfi claps once, satisfied. The elder declares him guilty, but only mildly, and Sten is sentenced to spend the afternoon helping at the bathhouse, scrubbing feet and learning humility. And just like that, justice is served. With cheese. You spend the rest of the day marveling at all the strange laws you've heard whispered over the months. There's the one about not stepping over someone lying down, or you risk confusing their spirit. Another bans whistling near burial mounds, lest you wake the dead. One village even has a regulation on how many times you can speak a rival's name during the thing. Say it more than 3 times, and you're forced to buy them a drink. One elder swears by a case where a man was fined for building a boat too shiny because it offended the sea spirits and blinded the local fishermen. The fringe tales get even weirder. There's the legend of the woman who challenged her neighbor to a baking duel after being called a loaf lifter. Her sourdough won, and the loser had to wear a biscuit hat for a week. Ridiculous, sure, but also kind of brilliant. These strange laws, these customs of cheese and beard insults, tell you more about Viking society than the blood and blades ever could. It wasn't just about war and conquest. It was about order, identity, and a very specific sense of humor. You realize that in a world this dangerous, laughter wasn't just welcome, it was needed. And sometimes the best way to stop a feud was with rhyme, food, and just enough public embarrassment to keep things balanced. As the sun sets, you pass Sten sitting by the river, wet and smelling faintly of soap. He nods at you. You nod back. Still think his beard was uneven, he mutters. You keep walking. Because even in a world of axes and exile, you don't re-insult the beard. The wind has shifted. You can feel it in the way the trees rustle outside the Longhouse, and in the heavy quiet of the village tonight. There's no laughter, no goat drama, no cheese trials. Just the low murmur of old voices and the smell of pine smoke drifting through the cracks in the wall. Something final is unfolding. You join the villagers at the edge of the sacred grove, where tall stones form a half circle like ancient teeth waiting to bite the sky. In the center stands an old man named Eirik, wrapped in a dark fur cloak, eyes heavy with years. He's not here to be punished, not exactly. He's here for what the Vikings call the last trial. It isn't a legal proceeding. It isn't even a sentence. It's a ritual, a blend of judgment, remembrance, and farewell. Eirik is dying, not today, but soon. His hands tremble when he drinks. His voice cracks when he speaks. And so, before death claims him, he must face his past. It's called Satargjord, a kind of spiritual reckoning. He's gathered everyone he's wronged, intentionally or not. And one by one, they step forward to share their grief, their grievances, or their gratitude. A woman accuses him of cheating her father in trade. A man says Eirik once struck him during a raid. A child, now grown, says Eirik scared her with stories of trolls. Then, one by one, each person forgives him, or doesn't. It's raw, it's emotional, and it's deeply human. You watch as Eric accepts every word, nodding slowly, never interrupting. When the last person finishes, he lifts a small horn of mead and drinks, a ritual sip. Then he sits in silence, letting the memories wash over him like cold rain. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or if it evolved later, blending with Christian influence. Some argue it was purely ceremonial. Others believe it was deeply rooted in the Norse obsession with honor in death. What's known is this: the Vikings feared being forgotten more than being judged. Eric has prepared his own burial goods, weapons, a lock of his wife's hair, a small wooden carving of Thor, and, curiously, a polished stone etched with his nickname, Eric Ember Eyes. The name was given to him in youth for his temper. Tonight, it feels more like a title. He lies down on a blanket beside the fire. No dramatic ending, just quiet breathing, and the faces of the people he lived beside, fought with, traded with, wronged and protected. You think back on every strange punishment you've seen. The ears lost, the hands burned, the shame pillars, the goat trials, the exile. But none of it feels as powerful as this: a man calmly facing his legacy. A final trial, held not in anger, but in truth. Later, as you return to your own bed, you can't shake the thought: this is the real reason the Viking world functioned. Not fear, not swords, but stories. People carried their history not in scrolls, but in scars, nicknames, and whispered tales. And when the punishment was done, when the blood dried or the tree untied you, what mattered most wasn't what you lost. It was how your story would be told when you were gone. Would you be remembered with laughter, with respect, with warnings, or all three? You pull the blanket up to your chin and exhale. You're still here. You've survived the punishments, the goats, the trials, the nose jokes. You still have your name. You still have your story. Let that be enough. And now, as the fire crackles lower and the village falls into sleep, let yourself drift. The stones of the shame pillar are cool in the moonlight, their runes faded, but still whispering names long gone. The pine trees sway gently, the time-out tree standing tall and silent, holding no grudges. Somewhere far beyond the edge of the forest, an outlaw tends a quiet fire, breathing in smoke and memory. The world of Viking punishments was harsh, yes, but also strangely warm in its humanity. There were rules, rituals, moments of ridiculous grace and painful wisdom. People stumbled, and they were punished, but they were also folded back into the fold, shaped not just by scars, but by stories. So let yourself relax into that world for a moment longer. Imagine the cool earth beneath you, the flickering shadows of a longhouse hearth on the ceiling above, the soft hush of wool against your skin, and the steady hum of wind threading its fingers through the grass outside. You are safe now. You are seen. You are forgiven for every silly mistake and goat-related misunderstanding your sleepy mind still holds on to. And as you exhale, let the weight of judgment lift. You've done enough for one life. Let your saga rest for now. Sleep well, traveler of tales. Sleep deep. Sleep safe.